George Roberts of Virginia is happy to be shipping with his new friend, Ned Low. But when he discovers that his friend is actually known as Bloody Ned, the merciless pirate, his salty pluck is put to the test. H. Bedford-Jones, today on the Classic Tales podcast. Welcome to the Classic Tales podcast. Thank you for listening. We are proudly supported by our listeners. Many thanks to our financial supporters who pitch in every month to help us keep the lights on. If you enjoy the show, please sign up to be a supporter for as little as $5 a month. We'll give you a monthly coupon code for $8 off any audiobook order. Go to classictalesaudiobooks.com and become a financial supporter today. Thank you so much. We have been shortlisted by Time magazine. In a recent article, Time chose 8 podcasts that help you wind down at the end of the day. Turns out, our show is up there with Levar Burton, Lore, and Atlas Obscura. A link to the article can be found in the description of today's episode. Also, in collaboration with the Audie Award-winning Nancy Peterson, I'm happy to announce that our dual narration of Agatha Christie's The Man in the Brown Suit will soon be available to purchase through our website. Look for a healthy sample coming your way in the podcast feed. Henry James O'Brian Bedford-Jones was a Canadian-American writer of adventure fantasy, science fiction, crime, and westerns in the golden age of pulp magazines. Enormously prolific, he wrote nearly 200 novels, 400 novelettes, and 800 short stories. He used so many pseudonyms that a perfect accounting of all his works is impossible. While many writers cranked out reams of adventure stories for the pulps in this period, this story is a standout for several reasons. It's firstly a story of pirates who have dark pasts and are trying to go straight. There's a plucky woman on board who is anything but a damsel in distress, and the focus on character progression over sensational plot devices is a breath of fresh air. But rest assured, there's plenty of action. This is a pirate story after all. And now, Pirate's Gold, Part 1 of 4, by H. Bedford-Jones. Chapter 1. It was past 6 bells and growing on to noon, and I was a homesick man as I stood on the quay below London Bridge and watched the King Sagamore swinging on her hawser out in the tideway. For she was Virginia-owned, and I, George Roberts of Virginia, knew her well, so that the sight of her was like a touch of home to me. Also, I had a vile headache, and my memory of the previous night's events was very hazy. I had met a number of other captains, and I think some ship owners at the Royal Arms, though I could remember only Ned Low and the dark man, Russell, because I liked the one and disliked the other. I seemed to remember that Low had promised his interest to try to get me a ship, or else a chief mate's berth, but I could recall little of what he had said, except that he told some gorgeous yarns of the guinea trade. "Good morning, Captain Roberts," came a voice, and I turned to see Russell himself approaching. I greeted him without pleasure, for there was a sneer in his eyes, and I did not like his gold-laced hat and jeweled fingers, or the look in his dark face. "You seem mighty busy," he went on, his heavy-lidded gaze searching me. "The captain put you under the table, I hear. Well, what think you of the King's Sagamore?" "Out of trim," I responded. "She's down by the head, or I'm a Dutchman." "Oh," said Russell, eyeing me. "But you're a Virginian, sir, and a seaman to boot. I have never heard of seamen coming from Virginia." or the other colonies. This angered me, as it also puzzled me. Why on earth the man should want to pick a quarrel I could not see. But knocking out my pipe and smiling, I obliged him swiftly. Plenty you never heard of, I imagine, particularly here in England. Eh? He bent his black brows upon me, scowling. How mean you? He added. Why, just this. What was your name before you made it Russell? At that, his white teeth showed. He clapped hand to belt as if feeling for a pistol, and I laughed at him. Hi. Try it with a Virginian, I told him, and chuckled again. Think you're on the high seas, my bucko? Russell, forsooth. If you're not a Portuguese, I don't know my business. I snarl all you please. And ladies' rings to your fingers, you cursed fool. Don't you know they hang pirates in London town? How long since you were on the account, as the gentry of that profession term it? That reached him between wind and water, as it were. I really meant to taunt him into action, since I wanted to feel my fist in his dark face. But I went too far. His hands dropped. He stood motionless, his eyes eating into me, and they became bloodshot. On the account, he repeated the phrase, a thickness in his voice. You speak glibly of it. Perhaps you've been on the account yourself, my fine Virginia sailor. Why, perhaps I have, said I cheerfully. And what of it? He looked at me for another moment, then turned on his heel and strode away very swiftly, as one who goes of set purpose. I looked after him, frowning. He had been at the tavern with Captain Low the previous night. Ned Low was an engaging rascal of the sort that men love, had been master of a Guineaman, and had traded at the Indies. Russell was of a very different stripe, a sinister man, certainly no Englishman, and I wondered that Ned Low would keep company with him. However, I dismissed the matter, filled my pipe afresh, and turned to watch the ship out in the stream. She was making ready to sail, and to a seaman's eye she presented some uncommonly interesting aspects. That homesick feeling grew on me as I looked. My first voyage had been made in her, under old Andrew Scott. A cold and hard master he was, too. Anyone who had sailed with Scott had tales to brag of, but Captain Scott was dead and gone these 2 years, thanks to a drinking bout with Sandy Fisher aboard the Margaret at Barbados. For Sandy craftily mixed some rare claret in the rum, and Captain Scott never rose from under the table. Well, Scott was dead, and here was I, a captain, and yonder the old King Sagamore. Heartily did I wish that I were commanding her, or at least aboard of her, since I was down to my last guinea, with no hope of a ship except I took out a slaver, for which I had no stomach. Gossip along the quay told me that she was bound for Virginia, but I doubted this. She was in ballast, and no ship went to Virginia in ballast these days. Also, she had bent a new suit of canvas and was fresh varnished, and I, knowing how stingy were her owners, realized that this was something like a miracle. What was more, I perceived a feather bed being put aboard her from the lighter alongside. A feather bed, indeed? No wonder all the Thames boatmen jeered her as they passed, and the crew of a fishing lugger tied at the quay began to bawl comments which set the river in a roar of laughter. I wondered who was going to use that feather bed. One cannot deny that the King Sagamore has a certain roll to her in the best of seas, an uneasy and fretful roll, as if endeavoring to shake loose of the bloodstains that have sunk into her teak. Even old Captain Scott had groaned and left the deck at times. Just now I heard a voice calling out, "There he be, sir. That's him a-smoking of the bacca." I glanced about to see a quay loafer pointing me out to a gentleman approaching rapidly. I faced about to meet this stranger in some surprise. He was a man in a hurry, a small fellow of 40-odd, wizened and thin in the cheeks, his eyes very sparkling. From his heaving chest and awry wig, he had lately been running. As he strode up to me, he produced a snuff-box with a great air of grandeur. "Your pardon, sir," he addressed me, his words rapid and with authority. "You are Captain Roberts, the Virginian?" "I am," was my response. "My name is Dennis Langton, merchant and goldsmith living at the Wheatsheaf in Lombard Street. I had word this morning from Low that you'd be sailing with us." He rattled this all out in a breath. Then he flung a glance over his shoulder and suddenly thrust the snuff-box at me. "Here, take this and fetch it aboard with you. Move sharp now. Tell Ned that I'll come aboard as he drops downstream. Give it to him and no other. With you this side Gravesend. Devil sink me, the dogs have caught the trail. Hide it, lad." Leaving the snuff-box hidden in my fist, the spry little man darted away from me and ran for cover like a hunted rabbit. I gaped after him, thinking him a madman, until the burst of shouts went up from the running men. "Stop! Thief!" went up the yells, shrill and sharp with the hunting fever. "Escape! Trip him up! Escape! Prentice is out! Stop thief! King's name! Pirate and thief!" Upon and past me swept a shrilling throng in a mad rush, 2 constables in the lead. Langton vanished in among the buildings, and they after him, and the chorus of yells was swiftly drowned in the noise of the city. I stood there staring after the rout, until the whimsicality of it all drew a laugh from me. The swift change from the pompous manner and address to the wild flight was ludicrous. The incident was strange and unreal. A merchant of Lombard Street pursued as thief and pirate? Pirate? Dennis Langton. Suddenly, the name flashed across my consciousness and startled me. 3 years previously, or rather 4, since it was early in 1720, I was mate aboard the ship Susanna, owned by a merchant of Southwarkside, near London. There had been much talk aboard her of how she had fallen prey to a brace of pirates near Madeira last voyage, and had later escaped. Spriggs was one of the rovers, the same who was lately hanged at Tyburn and still hangs there. And the other one. Now the name came back to me clear enough. Langton, and none other. Dennis Langton, a soft-spoken man, who was reputed to have murdered many with his own hand. Could the pirate Langton be the same man as this merchant and goldsmith? Most unlikely. And yet all things are possible in this world. Now came suspicion that he had stolen the snuff-box which he forced on me, and that I might be taken for a thief. This vanished when I opened my hand. The box was a small one of black wood, absolutely worthless. Nor had the little man the look of a cut-purse. And what was it he had said about Captain Low? A message for Low, too. And what was that about my shipping with Low? I felt bewildered. Thrusting the snuff-box into my pocket, I drew again on my pipe, frowning over this singular incident. I was still turning it over in my mind perplexedly, when there arose a new and more singular matter, which drove it completely out of my head, and no wonder. Hearing my name called, I looked around to see Captain Low himself coming toward me, bravely puffing at a pipe and laughing to himself over some inward joke. "Ha! Roberts! A fine morning to you, George. Damn me, but we had a pretty rouse last night. Why are you standing thus idle in the marketplace?" "Why, for lack of work." Smiling, I gave him a grip of the hand. "It seems to me that you said something about looking you up today, but I confess that last rum punch we brewed put a stopper on my brain. Sink me if I can remember a thing." "What?" Low gave me a singular, yet whimsical look. "Come, lad. You don't mean to say that you can't remember our discussion?" "Not a thing," I said ruefully. "I've lost even the name of your ship, Ned." He broke into a roar of laughter, dropped his pipe and smashed it, roared again, then clapped me heartily on the shoulder and swung me about. "There she lies, Roberts. Damn me, this is a creamy jest. Wow, wait until I tell John Russell about this. And you entered with me as chief mate, too. Oh, lad, have pity on me. Yonder's the King Sagamore, with poor gunner Basil loading the last aboard, and me sleeping abed all morning thinking you stood on her deck." Good Lord, I stammered. Do you mean to say that I, George Roberts, shipped as chief mate with you? He fell to roaring again with laughter, and I chimed in, helpless to withstand it. We stood there like two fools, holding our sides and sending up shouts of mirth that drew curious folk about to stare and wonder if we were loose from Bedlam. At length I came out of the fit of laughter, and we walked apart down the quay, discussing matters. When I told Low how I had been homesick for the King Sagamore, he began to bellow again. His news struck me with incredulity, but a glad man I was for the carouse of the night before, since I appeared to have landed a good berth with a man I liked. Ned Low was fully as tall as I, and even wider in the shoulder, a lean man, his face brown and hard, as if carven from mahogany, but ever ready to slip into the cheeriest laughter man ever heard. He had a whimsical touch about him, and I think had run away from Oxford for love of the sea, since he could quote the classics by the hour and spoke sometimes of Magdalen Towers. Well, he speedily made it clear to me that I was signed with him, and that he had all morning supposed me to be aboard, at which we laughed again. Russell came back and dragged me from table, just as I was sitting down to breakfast, with word that you were standing on the quay like a man in a dream, he concluded with a final chuckle. So I came along to see. Russell? I said, and frowned. Does he sail with us? Aye. Low took my arm frankly and turned me eye to eye with him. Listen, Roberts, we've got scant time to talk. I must get aboard and see to things, but you're a man after my own heart. I drank you under the table last night to make certain, since rum brings out the worst of a man. I know you and Russell must fall out, that's as it should be, but look out that Russell doesn't slip a knife into you, understand? I have to take him as second mate, willy-nilly, and as we explained last night. Well, run along and get your things, and don't miss the tide on your life. I must aboard. He turned, calling to a wherry just leaving the landing stairs, and made her with a swift run and a leap. I marveled at his cat-like agility, responded to his wave of the hand, and turned to seek my own clothes at the Hare and Hounds, fortunately close by. For all that I was a happy-go-lucky young devil, this morning's affair left me in somewhat of a daze, or perhaps the rum punch contributed to that effect. However, I was gradually coming to an understanding of things. Russell had come up to me in an evil humor, thinking that I was shirking my duty by loafing ashore, which would well account for his attitude. Not until I had nearly reached my lodgings did I recall that extraordinary meeting with the man Dennis Langton, and clapped hand to pocket with an exclamation. I had clear forgotten to speak of him to Ned Low. However, no matter now. It was evident that he must have seen Low that morning, or have heard from him that I was in charge of the ship. I packed my trunk and stepped into the ordinary to pay off my landlord. Just then a number of men came crowding in with much high talk, amid which I caught the name of Langton. At that I turned and listened, while the landlord gaped likewise. "And I think that Langton has all this while been a merchant in Lombard Street," cried one man with a volley of oaths. "A pretty pass we're coming to in London town." "They say," chimed in another, "that he has already sold out his business and was in shape to skip the city." "All by accident he was betrayed," spoke up another, a latecomer. "You've not heard? Zounds, a ripping story. In Lombard Street itself, only this morning, gentlemen, he came face to face with a shipman whom he'd plundered years ago, was recognized, dodged the hue and cry, and broke clear away. Now the constables are searching the city for him, and the waterside as well. A pirate at loose. Zounds!" I paid my score, engaged a man to carry down the trunk, and went my way somewhat thoughtfully. This Dennis Langton, known for a pirate, was a friend of Low and was hoping to get aboard the King Sagamore. I was going as mate aboard that ship. So was John Russell, and my words had stung Russell that morning. Russell, like Langton, had been on the account, as those who take to piracy term the profession. What about Ned Low? He was one of them. No use shirking the fact. This fine Virginia ship was going a-sailing on a mighty queer cruise, in ballast at that. And what about me, George Roberts of Virginia? Why, that was simple enough. Duty lay clear and straight before me. Inform the authorities. Have everyone aboard the King Sagamore laid by the heels and become a popular hero. The ship would be saved to its owners and everybody happy. Against this, there balanced Ned Low's frank and keen blue eyes, the clap of his hand on my shoulder, the comradely liking I bore him. Aye, because I liked him, I laughed at duty. Besides, I was never a great hand at informing. If I want a thing done, I go do it. This running to catch poles and constables is not to my mind. So we came down again to the quay, and as I pocketed my pipe, my hand touched the black snuff box. I drew out the thing and looked at it, pressed the catch and opened it. Inside there was no snuff, but a folded, bone-hard bit of vellum. I put the thing away once more. Let sleeping dogs lie, I reflected. Dennis Langton may be caught. If he's been posing as a merchant here in London, he'll be well known, and should be caught in an hour's time. That may simplify matters a bit. As for Ned Low, I trust him more than a little, and he should have sense enough to know that I'm not going on the account. Perhaps that's not his own intention either. I may be wronging him. I called a wherry and was taken out toward the ship. As we approached her, I fell to laughing again, for I had not the least notion whither she was bound or on what errand, and I remembered that feather bed going aboard, so that the whole affair struck me afresh with such whimsical humor that I could not refrain from laughing. Captain Low looked over the rail as we drew near, and he caught the infection and began to roar again with mirth, and was still grinning as I came over the side. "Welcome," he cried, and struck hands again, a hearty grip. "What's so merry?" "Why, I can't remember where we are bound for," I said. "Guinea or the plantations?" "It wasn't mentioned," and Low chuckled. "The Verde Islands, if you want to know, and then Barbados or elsewhere." "Then we stow salt at the islands, do we?" Low glanced around, saw that we were alone, and gave me a straight look. "Nay, Roberts, we stow gold. Art satisfied? And not on the account, neither." I nodded, and once again forgot about Dennis Langton's message. Chapter 2. After stowing my duffel away in one of the stern cabins, I came on deck again and inspected things. Captain Low had everything shipshape, and now there was little to do save to await the tide. Russell had not come aboard as yet either. Truly a sweet ship was the King Sagamore. Built originally for the India trade, she had much of the black teak in her making, and this was ever kept oiled and waxed, in neat contrast to her white deck and varnished spars, and the new canvas stowed aloft. At her bow, the torso of a feathered savage was set for figurehead. Glass eyes the Sagamore had in his painted visage, and I have heard said that the evil eye was entered into him. The men were clumped in groups forward, and to my disgust one of them was standing on the rail, exhorting several around him with a voice of wild fervor. A tall, thin man, hair flying in the wind, cheeks like yellow parchment, and a godly eye. Gunner Basil was this, who had a true preaching whine to his Puritan voice. "No place for you, Gunner," I said when I understood who he was. "Get you aft." He rolled his eyes at me and shook his head. "Nay, nay, sir. It is time that one officer of this ungodly heathen vessel should be able to think for the souls of these poor men." "Your argument may be sound, Gunner," I said, "but you had best learn that your place is to obey first and argue later." With which I clipped him under the ear and took his place at the rail. "Douse him with a bucket, lads," I said to the men, "and look alive. Where's the boatswain? Ah, Damn me if it isn't Bo'sun Pilcher out of the merry thought. Bose, remember our voyage in the Guineaman, do you? Glad to find you here, old friend. Watches made up, are they? All taut?
Aye, sir, all taut.
And Pilcher grinned. A savage brown fellow he was, with golden earrings dangling against his cheeks. Short and squat, powerful of build, he was worth a dozen men in a pinch. What are these preachers we have aboard, Bose? I demanded, looking at the men who stood about. A long-haired lot, with sanctimonious faces and rolling eyes.
Puritans,
said Pilcher, and spat over the rail.
Damned if they ain't, sir. It was Mr. Langton shipped the lot. I said 'twas no luck to let a crew be shipped by a Lombard Street merchant, nor is it. Nor an oath all morning, and us a working like blacks.
The crew shipped by Langton? I whistled at that. Obviously, no one aboard knew anything about Langton's adventures of the morning. Leaving my perch, I took Pilcher's arm and led him forward into the bows, where we might have a quiet word. "What's this, Bose?" I asked. "Say no word of it, but the merchantman Langton is being hunted through the city for a pirate. Russell has been on the account, or I'm a liar, and I'm not so sure about the master."
"Captain Low is the bloodiest of the lot," said Pilcher gloomily. "I'm not surprised to hear about Langton, not me. Low was pirating around Madagascar last year. Oh, I'm a wise man, I am, but nobody aboard knows it, do you mind, sir? If 'twas not for what we've got stowed aft, I'd have jumped ship."
"Eh?" I stared at him. "What's stowed aft, then?" I asked. He gave me a grin.
"Oh, you don't know, sir? Well, I'll not tell you. Why Langton went and shipped these here psalm-whining fish, I don't know. But that bleeding gunner Basil ain't the soapy fool he looks nor acts, Mr. Roberts. You and me are honest men, and the score up for'ard are honest fools, but Gunner Basil ain't one or t'other. Do you know where I heard tell of him? Far and away it was, last voyage."
We leaned against the rail, filled and lighted our pipes, and Bo'sun Pilcher told me what he knew about our zealous gunner. It was worth the telling.
"Do you mind, sir, last voyage? 'Twas in a Bristol brigantine to Madeira and the Verde Islands, and back with wine and salt, and a weary time it was, for she leaked like a sieve all the while. We hove out a Funchal, and made for the Isle of Sal to take our salt aboard. That was in the making. I got safe into the north end of Palmyra Roads and anchored with the palm trees east and by north, in that spot of clear sand bottom, 5 fathom. A man came off to us, a white man. Marooned there he had been, by a Frenchman named Mering or some such name. A pirate, it was. He told us of a great fight there had been aboard of the Frenchie 6 months back, and how there was a famous gunner aboard of her, a gunner by the name of Basil, full of all pirate learning, and a very law-shark, for all them that were on the account. And he said the Frenchie had shot off the lobe of this gunner's ear with a pistol, and had set him ashore, all from some dispute over a woman. And sink me if this here preacher ain't the identical scoundrel, sir. You look at his ear, and there it be. Well, that's not the whole of it, neither. This chap told us a long story which I disremember in the main, but 'twas all about this here gunner Basil, and some wild tale that lay along of him. Do you mind the pirate Avery? Gunner Basil had sailed with him, and talked in his cups about Avery's treasure that lay buried at one of the Verde Islands. He knew where the place was, and there be not another living man knew of it, and he was all for going after it, a wild tale enough."
"Wild, but it might hold truth," I commented. "Avery burned down one of the towns in those islands, and cruised about there. However, what matter to us? This gunner Basil, you think, is pretending to be a preaching Puritan just now?"
"Aye, to save his neck, belike."
Pilcher shook his earrings.
"Folks do call me a pirate because I wear hoops, and have a roll to my legs on dry land, and have use for an honest oath or two, but sounds, you know me, Master Roberts. I had liefer be me than this cutthroat devil of a gunner Basil, with his scripture and psalms and wine.
I had to laugh at this, which was true enough. Boatswain Pilcher had the looks of a pirate and the life of an honest man, a wife and 6 children in Jamestown, and a sober, careful record. Gunner Basil, on the other hand, with all the earmarks of a fanatical blue-nosed Puritan, was by repute a devil on the leash. "Well, Bose," I said, knocking out my pipe, "keep a close tongue, and wait for what turns up. You best look over the capstan and hawse, and be ready to up anchor. Tide's almost at the turn, and I see a boat yonder with Mr. Russell coming aboard." I turned and started aft, having now remembered something mighty important. As I went, I encountered Gunner Basil, who touched his forelock to me as I passed and made no comment on my lesson in obedience. Russell's boat was hailing us, and at the break of the poop I found Captain Low waiting for me. I was up the ladder and had him by the arm, fumbling in my pocket. "Ah, Captain, I met a friend of yours ashore, and he charged me with word for you." Before I could say more, Russell was over the rail and leaping up to us, his dark face all ablaze with fury and excitement. "The word's out after Dennis," he cried, but low-voiced that the men might not hear. "Devil's luck, Ned, devil's luck. Some fool recognized him this morning. Put the catchpoles after him. Sounds. If we don't get up the hook and into the channel, they'll twig the whole affair. Up and away, I tell you." Ned Low flung a glance at the after companion. His eyes were suddenly stricken. "Damn me, this is bad news," he murmured. "And at the last minute." "Up and away," snarled Russell, still panting. No, I'll not run and leave him," exclaimed Low warmly. But I intervened. "Langton isn't nabbed and won't be," I said, coolly enough, while they stared at me. "I met him ashore, and he had time to give me a message for you, Captain, before the constables set him running afresh. Said for you to drop downstream with the tide, and he'd come aboard, this side Gravesend most likely." "Good," cried Low. He snapped erect, as if this news had put fresh life into him, and his smile leaped out once more. "Trust Dennis to come clear. Mr. Russell, be ready to shake out those topsails in 5 minutes. The tide's nearly on the turn. Mr. Roberts, take charge forward and see the anchors well stowed." Russell gave me one look that was like a stab. Then his white teeth flashed in a laugh. "So you know Langton, Mr. Roberts," he said, and nodded. "Good enough. We'll pull together after all." Oddly, it seemed that his ill will toward me had vanished. This was all seeming, however, because he thought that I was a friend of Langton, and bore this latter some well-founded fear. He was soon enough snarling again. I went forward while the boatswain's whistle shrilled, and the men jumped to stations. Everything was shipshape. The men began to stamp about the windlass, capstan bars of dark teak all ashine in the sun, pawls clinking as the ship walked up on her hook, and the canvas aloft beginning to loose. A sweet ship was the King Sagamore. Every little detail of her was sweet and natty. Even the fife-rail was of red teak, and the belaying pins of black, heavy as iron. Now she leaned over to wind and tide and began to slip through the water, while Captain Low himself conned her through the river traffic. 6 bells was struck from the brass bell, and I minded the cabin boy struck them, a slim lad, a gutter-snipe of the town, his face pinched and marked with deviltry beyond the ken of most men. And I noted an odd enough thing. Shoving on the black capstan bars of teak, or hauling on the lines, there was no singing from those men of ours. Instead, not a sound from them until we were bracing the yards a bit, and then one long-nosed rascal began to chant out a psalm, in which they all joined. Damn me, but I can still hear the roar of mirth that went up as a barge passed us and caught the words. I sent the gunner down to see that all the ports were closed. She carried 4 guns to a side, and 6 patereaux, a well-armed jade. Or should I say warrior? The matter of sex is all a jumble when it comes to the King Sagamore. Pocahontas would have been a better name for her. This psalm-singing was too much for me, however. "Belay that singing," I ordered at length. "Bows, pipe 'em the old bowlin'. Join in, you Newgate rascals, or you'll taste trouble." So presently Pilcher led them, and the voice of Gunner Basil boomed up the words from below, and the rascals stamped the deck to a right tune. "O haul upon the bowlin, the fore and maintop bowlin. O haul upon the bowlin, the bowlin haul." And so we had everything snugged down for the present, and I joined Captain Low on the quarter-deck, while Russell and the gunner stood at the rail, watching the riverbanks slide past us. Now I went up to Low, who stood at the wheel, and spoke to him softly. "Ned, I said nothing of it before Russell, but Dennis Langton gave me more than a word for you. Hold out your hand and take the little box." He dropped a hand to his side, and I put the little black snuff-box into it. And not taking his eyes from the water ahead, he nodded. "Good, Roberts," he said quietly. "So Dennis is playing fair with us, eh? Fine. Look there, behind those fishing smacks. Is that a boat? Here, take my glass." I took the spyglass from his pocket and leveled it. "Aye, 2 oarsmen and Langton himself in the stern. Now they've seen us." "Stand by with the line, Russell," cried out Low. "Roberts, stand by those braces and be ready. We'll pick him up on the jump." Pick him up we did, nigh swamping the wherry in the attempt. Langton came up and over the rail, nimble as a cat, but he had not been on the escape for nothing, since his clothes were torn and muddied, and his wig clean gone, leaving him bald and shiny. Nor was this all, for no sooner was he on deck than he staggered and collapsed into the arms of Russell with a choked cry, and I glimpsed a smear of blood across the mate's shoulder. Ned Low saw it too, for he turned to me with a quiet word. "But lead in the lungs, and that's one of us gone to hell. Crack on all sail, Mr. Roberts. I leave the deck to you. Get us out of this cursed water and to sea before they send a man-of-war to stop us. This is a bad business. The poor girl." What he meant by this last I had no idea, for I was already calling all hands, and Pilcher piped the men to the weather braces and aloft on the instant. Russell and Ned Low carried the figure of Langton to the quarter-deck, and I saw nothing more of them for the time, being mighty busy alow and aloft. Gunner Basil I sent to the helm, needing a good man there if we were to race out of the river. The sails were loosed already, and the men piping down from aloft. "All aboard! Get your tack well down, bows. 10 braces, you lads. Set taut. Sheet home, and hoist away there. Lead along and man the flying jib halyards. Clear away the downhaul. Hoist! All hands main braces." So it went, with Pilcher's pipe whistling shrill and the canvas fluttering out. Much to my surprise, I perceived that these long-nosed dissenters forward were good enough seamen, and in no long time we were bowling away for dear life, our new canvas straining in the wind, and Gunner Basil handling helm in sweet fashion. Then, with all clear, I turned to the quarter-deck, and stood thunderstruck. Russell, sitting under the weather rail, held the head of Dennis Langton in his arms, while Ned Low knelt beside and talked to Langton, who was coughing blood. The man had a bullet through the body, and it needed no surgeon to know that his hours were numbered. It was not this, however, that held me transfixed, but the person kneeling over Langton's hand, for this was a woman. She had come from the after cabins, obviously, a straight, slim slip of a thing, all yellow golden hair and sober gray gown and long hands. Her face I could not see, but judged that she was young. A flutter aloft caused me to look at the helmsman. Gunner Basil was staring at the scene, and being down the wind was probably hearing their words. With an angry shout, I leaped to the wheel, shoved him away, and ordered him to take charge forward. He went, but with a sour snarl in his yellow parchment face. Indeed, standing in the wheel-box, I found that the wind brought me snatches of talk from the group. The girl was sobbing, and Dennis Langton was speaking to her between his terrible coughs. The words reached to me clearly. Even as I listened, even as I felt the ship with the wheel and held her in the wind, even as I watched shore and opening river mouth, I was aware of Gunner Basil and that devil-eyed little cabin boy, talking together near the foot of the main, and I wondered vaguely of what they were speaking.
"Keep it, Polly,"
came Langton's gasping voice.
"All for you. Swear. Promise me."
The girl sobbed out something. Without looking at him, I was aware that Langton's head lifted, and his eyes leaped to Ned Low.
"Ned? Ned? You'll not take it from her? Aye, you were always on the level. Met on the level with us. Parted on the square. Oh, there, Tyler! Outsawed Tyler. Run the knave through. Damn your eyes! Tyler, you missed him! Netting's up and we can't board."
For a moment he raved, then fell suddenly silent, gasping and sobbing for breath, coughing up the black blood. I stole a glance, and his face was white as beech ash.
"Call Russell, Ned,"
came his voice again.
"Where's Russell? John Lopez that was. John Russell that is now."
"I'm here, Dennis," said the dark mate, bending over so that Langton knew him.
"Swear to me, then,"
gasped the latter.
"Swear you'll give my share to Polly. Swear you'll be true to her, not cheat her. Swear!"
"Aye," said Russell, whose real name seemed to be Lopez. "I swear it, Dennis, and take the captain to witness."
"Swear it, Ned,"
cried out Langton, looking up. Ned Low, his face set and mournful, inclined his head. "I'll be true to you and her, Dennis, and will protect her, so help me. I swear it by the oath that you and I know, the oath of the book and compass and word."
"Where's Roberts, the Virginian?"
Langton's head lifted.
"Call him, good man Roberts, true man. Stand by him, Ned. I liked that man. Call him. Swear him."
Ned Low strode over to me. "Give me the helm and go to him, quick, man, before he passes." I obeyed. Although I was in the dark as to this oath, it appeared honest enough and would soothe the passing of a dying man. As I knelt before Langton, recognition came into his eyes, fighting the fear of death that was filling them.
"Swear, Virginian,"
he panted out.
"Stand with Polly. Her share."
"I swear, Dennis Langton," was my response. His head dropped back, and a cry came from the girl's throat. Then, with a furious and frightful effort, Dennis Langton swept Polly aside, wrenched himself to his feet, swayed there, and shook his fist toward London. Laughter and blood came from his lips, and one last wild cry.
"Cheated you, Jack Ketch! Cheated you first and last, Tyburn Tree! Sink me to hell if I haven't the laugh of you after all! Zounds!"
He rattled on the word and died, and pitched forward with a laugh terrible on his lips. Thus passed the first of our company aboard the King Sagamore. And as I watched Russell take the weeping girl to the companionway, I wondered to what oath I had sworn myself in the hand of a dying pirate. Chapter 3. While we pitched and rolled down channel that night, I was below with Ned Low, seeing that Dennis Langton was properly sewed up for burial. Gunner Basil brought a shot for his feet, and then, touching his forelock, respectfully enough addressed us, and in the light of the swinging lantern his parchmenty face looked more yellow and wolfish than ever. "Beg pardon, masters, but who's a-going to say the prayer over him?" he asked. "I am." Ned Low glanced up. "Why?" "It ain't fittin', sir," protested the gunner, with an air of earnest, stubborn conviction. His pale, deadly eyes were fastened upon Low. "He died in sin, most like, but it ain't fittin' for you to say no prayer, sir. It's the spirit movin' me to protest." Ned Low straightened up.
Now sink me. I'm master of this ship. We that has a higher hope don't hold with no blasphemy, beg pardon, master. What be you but an ungodly, unregenerate sinner? Blasphemy it is, no less. More'n one of us aboard heard tell of Bloody Ned, Captain. I ain't here nor there. But when it comes to saying prayers, I speaks up. It's the spirit moving in me.
Bloody Ned. Well, there it was, like a slap in the face. I had heard of Bloody Ned too, but had not connected the name with my good friend Captain Ned Low. For a moment I thought Ned would strike the man down. Eyes clenched with eyes, and in the obscurity behind Gunner Basil, I perceived more than one dark figure lurking. Then in time I recalled the tale that Bosun Pilcher had told me, and pushed forward with a nudge in Low's ribs. "What's all this?" I demanded. "This is fine talk from you, Basil, who were on the account with Avery and served as his gunner. And what about that French pirate you sailed with, the one who pistoled you and marooned you after the big fight, eh?" There was dead silence, broken only by the groan of stanchions and the creak of blocks. My knowledge of his past took Gunner Basil all aback. He gaped at me from a livid and stricken face. Ned Low uttered a soft oath of astonishment. A murmur began to rise from the listening men. I struck again while the iron was hot. "A prayer would come with ill grace from you, Gunner, as lief from Bloody Ned as from Avery's gunner, if I'm the victim. Who was it nicked the lobe off that ear of yours with a pistol ball, eh?" Gunner Basil staggered again at that thrust. I felt a swift stab of fear as I met those pale eyes of his. Then he began to shake his long head and whine. "When a man repenteth him of the evil and turns to godliness, the scornful make mock of him. Aye, sir, you ha' the right of it. A sinful man I ha' been, and taken part wi' men o' blood, and now that regeneration ha' come upon me, by the works of the blessed Tom Devaney o' Houndsditch." "Regeneration your eye, you damned lousy swab of a liar!" broke in a roar, and Bosun Pilcher lurched forward. "Who was it a-throwing oaths so free and fine but a half-hour ago? You scabby sawyer, thinking no one was by to hear? Now out-knife if you dare, and I'll show you summat." It looked like blows and hot breath, for Pilcher had hand on knife and Gunner Basil was clutching under his arm, but Ned Low stepped forward and stood between the two men and reasserted his command. "Damn ye, do you think we're on the account? To settle quarrels with a steel?" he cried out. "Out of this, Bose. You, Gunner, give me no more of your sanctimonious lip, do you hear? You'll taste a dozen of the cat next time. Get this boy made ready, and 5 bells in morning watch, call all hands for burial. Mr. Roberts, it's hard on 8 bells. You'd better step up and stand by to take the deck from Mr. Russell."
"From Portuguese Lopez, you mean?"
shot a voice out of the shadows.
"Lopez, the bloody pirate what scuppered 3 deal craft last year."
"Who was that?"
snapped Ned Low, hand dropping to belt.
"Out of the dark, you rat! Who was it?"
None answered him, however, and the darkness proved empty to the swing of a lantern. So I went on deck again, wondering not a little. That voice had held an odd twang, not unlike the tones of the impish cabin boy. But that was impossible. The child stood in deadly fear of us all, and was seasick to boot. With a fair wind, ballast trimmed anew, and one of our brawny dissenters at the helm, we bore down channel into the darkness, while I, after lighting my pipe in the lee of the pilot-house, reflected a while upon my situation. It might have been worse, what I knew of it, and it might assuredly have been bettered. Certain outstanding things looked dark. One certainty was that in London town I had run foul of 3 fine rogues, and like a blockhead had been hooked. Langton's End spoke for itself. Russell, or Portuguese Lopez, obviously had something of a reputation as a pirate. Of Bloody Ned I had heard, and was grieved to find it was my own Ned Low, the man whom I so liked. As to the girl Polly, I had not seen or heard of her again, but she seemed to be some relation to Langton. Why had these three men outfitted and chartered, as they must have done, the King's Sagamore? To get gold from the Cape Verde Islands, Ned Low had said. All very fine, but how? There was the puzzler. They had not meant to run away with her and go on the account. Langton, in his capacity as a city merchant, had probably given bonds for her, and he had most certainly picked the crew himself. These men were godly rogues, and I did not like them in the least, but they were honest men. Langton would never have picked such a crew to ship as pirates. Then again, there was the question of Gunner Basil. Captain Low had been utterly astounded at learning the gunner's record. He had known nothing of it. Ergo, Dennis Langton had known nothing of it, and had shipped the gunner at face value. But why the hell had Gunner Basil shipped aboard us? I took no stock in his regeneration. One look in the man's eyes clapped a stopper on all that. He could fool the men up forward, but he could not fool me, much less Bosun Pilcher. And what was that oath I had taken? It disquieted me. I had reached this point, and 2 bells had just been struck, when the tall figure of Ned Low approached. He glanced at the compass, lighted his pipe, then took my arm and led me to the lee rail, where we could speak without being overheard. "Roberts, I've been talking with John Russell, and I'm worried," he said frankly and bluntly. "This morning, standing on the quay, you as good as told Russell you'd been on the account yourself. Tonight you flashed some information on Gunner Basil that staggered him, and me with him. How came you to know it, lad? If you've lied to me, then let's have it out sharp and quick and reach an understanding." This was a stiff jolt, and I let him know it. About Russell, that was said in jest, to taunt him. As to the rest, Ned, well, I learned tonight that you are Bloody Ned. It grieved me, but I didn't come running and whining to ask if the news was true. Sounds. If I'm such a fool that I can't read a man's eye for true or false, it's a queer thing. And I'll stick by my guns. Swing me if I don't. Low caught my hand and gripped it hard. "Spoken like a man, George Roberts," he said warmly. "Aye, and with a bitter back to the words that I deserve. Your pardon, lad. We'll have a meeting in the cabin tomorrow morning after breakfast, all 4 of us, and you'll know then why I'm anxious." "Who's the 4th, then?" I asked. "Polly Langton, niece and heir of poor Dennis. That was a stiff loss to us, George. Dennis had a head worth any 2 going." "He'd not much when he shipped our gunner," I said acidly. Ned Low whistled. "Perchance. But the scoundrel may have told truth after all, lad. There's a chance of that, d'ye mind? Men have reformed ere this, and will again. I look at me myself." He was silent for a moment, then took me across the deck again and under the weather rail, where we sat down in comfort. I think he had been much moved by my challenging answer to his doubts. At least he spoke with a refinement and feeling in his voice that I had not previously heard. "Roberts, you've never seen or heard, I suppose, of a man calling himself Trunnell Toby, having a long face like a horse, and sad eyes, and a gold ring in his nostrils, and the likeness of a bleeding heart tattooed upon his breast, just above his own heart?" "Not I," was my answer. "I have sought that man going on 5 years, said Ned Low. "Once I knew that his ship lay in Carlisle Bay, and I sighted her plain. But there was a gale blowing, and we were short of men, and before we could hand the small sails and luff for the bay, we were driven past, and the gale held us. And when I came back again, he was gone. Oh, but I had tried with heart and soul to find that man, all up and down the dark bowl of the sea. And once I was within an hour of him, at Madagascar, that was. Aye, we missed him by a scant 60 minutes.
though I caught 3 of his men left behind and hanged them. He had heard of Bloody Ned, and he ran for it. And off the Zanzibar coast I met a ship that had spoke him 2 days before, and north we ran and passed him in a hurricane, and he came over to the Brazils for fear of me. Now and again and every way I found men who had sailed with him, men who had partnered or traded with him, and I hanged them all as I came on them. But I never found Trunnell Toby, and I lost hope of finding the man now, so I am off to recoup my wasted fortune again, and search some more. The last of my guineas are in this ship, Roberts, and a big sum from poor Langton, and a share from John Russell. And I am afraid to ask Gunner Basil if he knew the man, for if he did I would hang him, and we would have need of a gunner aboard. Besides, the man may have reformed, as he says. I'd put it past no man to turn righteous. For look you, George, there is a reason behind all of us. Aye, there's a reason back of each man who dares this wine-dark sea and listens to the rigging as it sings the slumbering song of night up above. Lord knows I have earned the name of Bloody Ned, earned it with hangings of men alow and aloft, but all of them men who had known Trunnell Toby. Do you mind that? And I've naught to repent of at all, either. I've touched no man's life but for this cause. I've touched no man's money but mine own, honestly made. And poor Langton, to whom that gunner laid his tongue, had become an honest man. Do you know why, George? Because of the girl, down below, his niece Polly. And she's a rare lass, I tell you. Bred of the Devon blood she is, and can hand sail with any man or read the card or steer by the wind. So when I came and said that I was for the gold, and had given up the search for Trunnell Toby until we had the guineas again, Langton knew it was an honest word, and came in with me, and John Russell made up the sum we lacked, and we bought this ship, George. Bought her? I said in some wonder, for that would have taken round money. Aye, just so. A company venture for the gold. We'll have it again soon enough, and then I'll buy out the other shares and keep the King Sagamore, and go again after Trunnell Toby. Sure you've never heard of the man? Never, I said. But there's Boatswain Pilcher come to look at the helm. Call him, for many a thing he has heard and seen, and an honest man to boot. Ned Low lifted his voice, and the dark shadow of Bose detached itself from the pilot box and came over to us on the sloping deck. So there Ned Low asked his question again, and described the man he sought. Bose turned the quid in his mouth and chewed upon it, and spat over the stern rail, and then made careful answer. Why, sir, there be many a man with a face like a horse, and 1 or 2 aboard here, but not that man. Seems like I've heard tell of he too. Let's see now. Was it aboard the Merry Thought? No, it was not. It was not so long ago. Ah, damn me eye, sir, if 'twas not 2 voyages back on the Pricket brigantine, with Captain Baxter out of Bristol town. I mind it well enough now. We were lying at Lisbon, and a supercargo there was, telling me of such a man, bleeding heart and all. Mate on a London trading brig he was, and had got into trouble with the Portuguese folk, and had skipped between 2 days. That's where I heard the name, and more than that I can't bring to mind. Then let it pass, said Ned Low, sinking back against the rail. Aye, sir, said Bose. 4 bells it is, sir. Make it so, Bose, I told him, and he went off into the darkness. The brazen tinkle of the bell had died away before Ned Low spoke again. And what think you, George, he said, of sailing mate with Bloody Ned? I laughed a little at that. What else but your own words, Ned? We're not on the account, but for honest gold, you say, and enough said. There's a reason behind every man sails up the sea, you say, and enough said. For the rest, I like you. I have 2 fists, and if I go to the devil, it's my own fault and no other man's leading.
Well said, George. What reason is behind you? Ruined fortunes, a girl who jilted me, and lack of ties to keep me ashore. Those in the first place. In the latter place, love of good ships, work to do and strength to do it with, and knowledge of my profession. For I hold the sea to be a profession, Ned, in despite of all men. I sailed a small sloop with 2 boys from the Azores to Barbados once to prove the fact. What was more, I built the sloop before sailing her. You're a philosopher, George, and damn me if I don't wish I might be one too, he responded, and sighed. Work to do, and strength and knowledge to do it with. What more could any man ask of fortune? But my work's undone as yet, and when done, it's only a man hanged after all, and small joy of it to me. With this he rose, and was gone down below. I wondered much about his words, and his curious tale of Trunnell Toby, and what reason must lie behind his strange pursuit of that creature up and down the waters of the earth. Reason in plenty there must be, but I could not evoke it from his words. It began to appear, however, that he was not the black pirate he was painted, and this was something to cheer me. So the night wore through, and the wind held fair, sweeping us steadily to the southward on our course, and with the dawn, or a little while after, we gathered all hands in the waist. Now all the world was shut away from us, we aboard the King Sagamore, bounded by those walls of English oak and India teak, were in a little world apart, devils and angels and men together. There was the dead man, shrouded decently, and by him Ned Low, book in hand, and dark, quick-eyed Russell, dirk and pistol in belt, and Gunner Basil, pale, terrible eyes flaming and stabbing about. Little love those pale eyes bore me, either. There, too, Boatswain Pilcher, gold earrings bobbing beside savage brown cheeks, and back of him the men, making a full score of us all told. Some I had come to know by this time. Dickon the cabin boy, grey, with the sickness and mouthing vile oaths. Simon Blake and Ezra Blake, his brother. Gaunt, hard-jawed fellows who could prate psalms by the hour. And Philip the cook, a black man who was very joyful about his work and always grinning. Humphrey Stave was chips and sailmaker, a bent, gnarled figure with deep eyes behind spectacles, and a bit deaf. Stave was the only other man forward who was not a man of religion and godliness, so that he companioned much with Pilcher. The others were all hard men, devout enough and good seamen, but given to exhorting each other with prayer and advice. Dennis Langton had picked them for this very reason, having no mind to ship pirates on this voyage. Nonetheless, he had made a mistake. One of the men, Thomas Winter, was long in the face, a real horse's face indeed, seeming but little short of a half-wit, nor ever raised his eyes to meet those of another man. Well, we buried poor Dennis Langton there, sliding him off into the rolling seas. And after reading the proper service, Ned Low softly asked the gunner to speak a prayer. Gunner Basil did so, praying a good 10 minutes in a long, whining sing-song, the other knaves all joining in with their nasal "Amen" when the spirit moved. Then breakfast, and then to the cabin for the promised meeting, while Gunner Basil held the deck. And in this meeting I had sight of Polly Langton, and likewise got a bid from Fortune. This is B.J. Harrison. I hope you've enjoyed this unabridged production of Pirates' Gold, Part 1 of 4 by H. Bedford-Jones. If you have enjoyed this book, please become a monthly supporter by going to ClassicTalesAudiobooks.com. Donate $5 a month and get a monthly coupon code for $8 off anything in the store. give more and you get more. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for joining me today and allowing classic literature to awaken your better self. Please join me every week, and we'll rediscover the greatest stories ever put to paper.